Hey guys, I hope you're all doing very well. Welcome back to another video. And today I'm going to be talking about Spider-Man 2. Now, when it comes to the previous Spider-Man games, Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales, I think they are great solid games. I did enjoy the first Spider-Man game and I did enjoy Miles Morales, but unfortunately the game was very short for it to be a worthwhile experience. But I think overall with the Spider-Man games, they're very solid. I do like the combat. I like the open world of how they recreate New York. I think a lot of elements of the story I do also like as well. So I think overall with the Spider-Man games, they're pretty solid games. And I think for anyone who loves a superhero open world game, I think these games are definitely worth a shout playing. So when it came to Spider-Man 2, I have completed the game. Haven't gone 100% though. So my thoughts about Spider-Man 2 is it's still a great game. I think it doesn't exceed so much of my expectations from the previous games though. I think a lot of the game itself does maintain the elements of the previous games, which is good. I think there are a lot of things that they've done with this sequel where they've really gone further and then really made massive improvements. But I think there are some elements of features in this game where I think they probably went a little bit backwards. I don't think it's so detrimental, but I think for some they might be. But I'm kind of going to give my thoughts and takes of it. But overall, if I had to describe Spider-Man 2, it's a great solid game. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the things that I think are really worthy about this new game. So the first good thing I could really point out is that now this game you now take control of both Spider-Man, so you could take control as Peter Parker as well as Miles Morales, and I think they do a great job of actually integrating both Spider-Mans into this game. And certain times when you're playing throughout the main story, you would have either Peter Parker or Miles Morales doing some of the main missions and following their story and their perspectives. And I think at times it actually works very well. I think some parts of their own story, it kind of drifts a little bit, where there's a lot of unstimulating, not really fun missions to get through. But I think when you get through some of the main missions where it involves like main combats or even main villain protagonists, I think they do a very good job at building those sort of story notes up. So I think that's a really good feature that they integrate both Spider-Mans into this game. What's also really good is that, both Spider-Man as well, when you either control Peter Parker or Miles Morales, they do have their own abilities as well that you can control. And they do really feel very distinct from each other. So it's not like when you take control as Peter Parker or Miles Morales, they do the same sort of web slinging or any of those sort of web powers or any of that. They do have their own abilities. And I think really integrating, each of them to their own story or even integrating them together in certain missions, I think it does a really good job in making this game a worthy improvement of the previous games. I've also really enjoyed other new features that they added to this game. So one of the new features that they have is now the web slinger or the web swing. So basically it's a glide now where you could just basically use to sort of glide around the city of New York, and I think it's a really great way of traversing around. And I think it has been very useful for me because there are lots of times throughout this game that they have expanded the city of New York, so they've actually made it more bigger on a more open scale. And a lot of the times you would use the web glides or the web sling to really go around gliding around places where there's lots of wind that could really boost up your speed, and it does make it more of a more varied way of traversing. So I think those features alone really adds to the experience, and I think really making New York bigger to the open scale is really impressive. Now I did start playing the game in performance mode, which I think was a bit of a diminishing experience, but then I changed to fidelity mode, and really looking at the scale of New York and its draw distance was actually really outstanding. And I think they really recreate New York in this game. It's probably the best that they've actually done it from what Insomniac have done. I think it really looks, from the details of it to the locations, I really honestly think that they really put the ambition and the work to really make New York more alive. And I think certainly when you play in fidelity mode with all the ray tracing, you do play at 30 frames per second, but it is a consistent 30 frames. So you're not really experiencing any sort of massive frame drops from this game. It does maintain a very consistent performance. And let me tell you, just the way New York looks, certainly in Spider-Man 2, is really, really impressive. So I think those are some of the big things that they've really made massive improvements to. Now, I think some of the things I will kind of make some critiques to with this game is, I think as well as the story being good for most of its aspects, there are some elements of the missions where they haven't really been really engaging to play as much. So I think mostly in some parts of the beginning and the middle section of the game, there were some missions that just didn't really sort of maintain my attention at all, and it kind of dragged too much with cutscenes and everything. But to be honest, I think those are very sort of minute things I could really point at with this game. I think as well, one of the things that I think was a bit questionable to me is that they've actually made changes to some of the upgrade systems now. So if I remembered correctly from the first Spider-Man game, you would also have suits in the game. Now in Spider-Man 2 there are suits, but what was unique about the first one is that they used the suits and they all had a distinct ability about them. So it did make more sense that when you actually have these suits that will just, not only a cosmetic, it also had its own abilities and powers. Now with the new version, Spider-Man 2, you have suits, but they're more cosmetics. They actually don't have any power-ups at all. Now, most of the abilities you do get in this game are more unlocked when you progress through the story. And that's really the only times you get new abilities throughout the game. You don't actually get abilities from your suits, which I think is a bit of a shame, because for me, it would have made more sense that I could have actually gotten more suits. But obviously, because they didn't possess any sort of abilities or anything, it was just more of a cosmetic. It kind of just made me, I just bypassed it throughout the game and just carried on with my normal suits. And I would rather use some of those credits and stuff that you earn throughout the game, more or less unlocking new abilities and new gadgets. Now, they do maintain the gadgets throughout the game as well. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head if they actually added more gadgets or less. But to be honest with you, the gadgets they have, I think it's more than enough to really use throughout the game. They do have now more abilities now in this game. So certainly when you play Peter Parker Spider-Man, he does have his own sort of abilities. So he has he has his spider suit, but he also has these sort of spider claws. And there's also, from the trailers, I don't want to get into the spoilers, but he also does have access to using his symbiote powers. So the symbiote that was in Venom and everything, he also possesses those powers that can be used throughout the game as well. And then also you have Miles Morales, that he has control from his suits using electrical abilities. There's also more of those as well. Now, throughout the story, that's what you would unlock. And it does actually make it more action-orientated to a lot of the gameplay's perspective. And it makes you kind of think which ones you want to have. So you actually do have a cycle where basically if you press L1, you either press X, circle, square, or triangle, that will access some of those abilities. And then obviously you use the webs where you press R1, you can access different sort of gadgets as well. So they do make more efforts to actually have more combat variety, which I actually think is a good thing. Now, obviously the main detriment is obviously with the previous games, when you had the suits, you would obviously have its own powers. Now, obviously, that's not there. So I think they did make some improvements to that, but there are some sort of downsides to it. So I think there is a little bit of criticism you could point at for this game's for its variety, but then also you could praise it for some of its new aspects and new combat mechanics that they also added to this game as well. Overall, if I had to really describe Spider-Man 2, I think it's definitely, they've made some improvements to this game that are definitely worthy. I wouldn't say it really outplaces the first Spider-Man game, but I think, well and truly, I think they've really made some good improvements. I definitely preferred the story of Spider-Man 2 compared to the first one. I think there are a lot more, more darker elements to this story, which you will all see throughout the game. I do think most of its combat is actually very, very good for the improvements that they made from the previous two games. Now, there isn't so much I would describe stealth elements from this game. I think the previous game had more stealth elements, and I think for some they could argue that the stealth elements weren't really that fun. But I think that's kind of more, that's opinions, I would say. I think there's good variety, but they weren't so engaging. Now they do have a new way of using stealth, which you can use I think it's kind of you use a web sling or a zip line, where you can basically just use to traverse different areas of the area that you're countering for stealth, and just basically you could use your web powers to basically make sort of silent attack on enemies. Now some of it I think was pretty too simple for what it is, but I mean I don't know whether how people would feel about that. But overall, I think the combat's good. Some of the stealth mechanics are a bit questionable. I also would say that if they added more abilities to the suits that they could have, it could be an improvement as well. But I think they do make some good improvements to some abilities as well, such as using the different Spider-Man's abilities, and you can use like a cycle of 4 different abilities at once. I think those are some of the changes that they want to make some distinction that's new about the new Spider-Man game. But I think this is definitely a worthy sequel. I think it stays true to what the fans want. And I think Insomniac have done a very good job recreating this game. So overall, if I have to rate Spider-Man 2, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I think it's definitely a slight edge improvement of the first game. I think for some it could be very interchangeable, but I think they've done a very good job. So I think certainly the good jobs they make is they definitely recreate New York very well. The game actually performs really well, especially for most of the time in Fidelity mode, which I would recommend you play this game at. Also, the combat system's very good. The integration of the 2 Spider-Mans is very good, and elements of the story for most of its parts probably is an improvement from the first game. The only real things I could really point at this game is that they haven't really made some distinctions to make some improvements, such as using the spider suits with their own abilities, which I would have preferred. Some elements of the story were a bit flat from some parts of the game. And I will also say this was a minor point, but there are a few glitches in this game as well. So there are times where you have to kill or beat a lot of enemies to progress through the story, and sometimes I was in certain areas where you wouldn't find where the enemies are because there are some glitches in this game. So those are some of the only sort of drawbacks I would have from this game. But I think overall this is a great game. It's really solid. You will definitely have a lot of fun with this game. If you're a fan of superhero games or just love open world games, I think this is really a worthy addition for sure. And yeah, that's about it. See you later.